the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna! How we doing? We are a week and a half away from the baseball season. Let that sink in for a second. We have reached the point of spring training in which it has become unwatchable. I will admit that. As a baseball geek, I put on a little bit of Sunday's game, just a tad bit, and I had it on, and this is no disrespect to Gary Apple, who does a fine job when he has to fill in for Gary Cohen or fill in for Steve Gelbs. But I heard Gary Apple's voice. I heard Jerry Blevins' voice. And again, they did nothing wrong. They're fine. And I saw big Tyler McGill, the big drip on the mound. I saw him throw one slider, and I looked over at my wife and I said, "What are we doing?" And she said, "What do you mean? What are we doing? What are you doing?" And I'm done. I'm freaking done, because even, looking at Francisco Lindor, the man we love, the future captain of the New York Mets, and even watching him and seeing, oh yeah, he's barely hitting spring training. And I start to put in my head, am I supposed to care about this? Am I supposed to worry about this? Am I supposed to say, uh-oh, this is a sign that Lindor is about to get off to another bad start? So I'm at the point where, for my own mental health, I'm going to cut myself off from watching spring training baseball. And I think it helps that the NCAA tournament is here, so there's even more sports to consume that's not spring training baseball. Now, I'm a liar, because the reality is I'll still pay close attention. I'll still check the box scores, and we'll still do Rico Brogna's, in which some of the things we talk about, certainly not the majority, but some of the things we talk about may be based on results from spring training. But I've had it. And this is normal, because we are a week and a half away from the real stuff, from the real baseball, from games mattering, from us sitting around and first guessing and second guessing Carlos Mendoza moves. So this is the worst part of spring training. I'm glad they have the spring breakout games, because at least it's something different. At least it's, hey, let me watch my prospects. Let me get excited about thinking about Jonah Tong or Jet Williams or Ryan Clifford, who had a bomb of a home run in the spring breakout game the Mets played on Sunday. But for the most part, we have entered the hell portion of spring training. Now, today on the Rico Brogna, this is about you. This is about the people. This is a full Rico Brogna mailbag. So please ignore the first 3 minutes of me bitching about spring training, and let's get right to the people. I am trying to answer as many emails as we can. We do appreciate the influx of emails that you give us at the ricob@gmail.com. So if your email was not read today, do not take it personal. It doesn't mean your email sucked. It doesn't mean we didn't like your email. It just means there's a lot. So we do the best we can. So let's start things off with Brett Baty versus Luis Angel Acuña, because a lot of people have a lot to say about Baty versus Acuña, mainly because I'm on Team Baty. I believe Brett Baty. I've said this a lot on the Rico. I'm sure this will be regurgitated a little bit throughout the pod today. I believe that this is the final chance to see what Brett Baty has. So let's start things off with Jose. Jose writes, I don't understand the love affair with giving another opportunity to a player that has failed in the majors in his very own position. Although Acuña played just 2 weeks, he showed more than Brett Baty. Plus, you're asking Baty to prove it again at a position? How will that help him focus on hitting when he has to try to play a position he hasn't played in the majors? Brett Baty doesn't fit this roster, and we all need to accept that. Play the natural middle infielder and trade Brett Baty. That's from Jose. And I wanted to start off with that email because I do think Jose represents a lot of people out there who are sick of Baty, who don't believe in Brett Baty, who are pushing back against my narrative, which is Luis Angel Acuña needs more time to develop in the minor leagues. Look, Jose, if Brett Baty can hit major league pitching again with another opportunity, and the reason is because he's learning second base at the major league level, then that's going to be it for him, bro. And that's kind of the whole point. If you're right about Baty, if it is so overwhelming for him to learn this new position, a position he's learned now for almost a year. He started doing it in the minor leagues last year, but I get it. He hasn't done it at the major league level yet. And so far, watching him in spring training, my early impression of him and there isn't enough of a sample size to have a firmly strong opinion about his defense. But my early observation is he's okay. He certainly doesn't remind you of Roberto Alomar, but he's not an albatross over there. He hasn't been abysmal over there. He's been able to, for the most part, make the routine play. I saw him commit an error the other night. It wasn't the easiest play in the world, but no, he's not Robbie Alomar. But this is about seeing for one last chance, can this guy hit at the major league level? And if he doesn't, Jose, they'll trade his ass. But they're not doing it before opening day, nor should they. Lance writes, I wrote this pre-Jeff McNeil injury, and it still holds true. If Brett Baty is on this team opening day, it has to be a quick trial period, and then you make a final decision on him. He's been up for parts of 3 different years. His batting average has went from horrible in 2022 to, I guess, just bad last year. In all 3 years, he's been remarkably consistent, averaging 1 strikeout and 1 total base per game each year. He's going to pull a couple of home runs and then look like a stiff for the rest of his at-bats and have a slugging percentage that looks like a batting average. They want to give him one more chance? Fine. But they need to have a real quick hook, and then Acuña or Mauricio, if he's ready to come up, because they have special electricity to the way they play, especially Mauricio if he's healthy. Let Baty go hit 400 in the minors and trade him midseason to Seattle for some pitching. The only thing I have to add post-injury is that this is why they should have given Iglesias a minor league deal at the least. That from Lance. So that's the second part of the whole, okay, fine, Brett Baty's going to play second base. How long do you stick with him? I think Jeff McNeil's return, we'll see if it moves back or moves up. So far, the Met track record on injuries has been good. It seems like Sean Manaea is on his way back on a time frame that's very reasonable. But as far as how long do you let Brett Baty kind of live out there, my early impression of that is basically a month. And that's not necessarily as the everyday second baseman because, like I mentioned, if McNeil comes back, I think there's still a role for him on the major league level, whether it's DHing a little bit, whether it's playing a little third base with Vientos moving to first base or Vientos DHing, or God forbid there's another injury we're not even thinking about. But I guess to me, the opportunity for Baty is about a month plus. And if he doesn't hit, and it's basically the same crap we saw last year, I don't know if he's necessarily back in the minor leagues or traded away or DFA'd or whatever kind of blood certain Met fans are looking for. But obviously, he's not going to get nearly as many at-bats. I'll start with that. I mean, right now, he should start the year as the predominant second baseman. But if he's failing and we're sitting here in early May, whether he's in the minor leagues or what have you, he's not getting that full opportunity to play. And I think he would lose that opportunity if he continued to follow the trends of the last couple of years.
Now, I know he didn't get a lot of at-bats last year, Brett Baty. I forgot what the total was. But he had a...
Pete, like he was the third baseman early in the season, so he ended up not getting a lot of at-bats because he failed and missed his opportunity.
No, he did, but he got 108 games in the year before. So that was a good sample size. Now, I understand now he's 2 years older. You think that maybe he's mentally stable because that was part of the issue is that Brett Baty was, didn't have the best time. He was a little whether it was nervous, whether it was just had a poor reaction and got down on himself. Like, now's the time. He's 2 years removed from that 108-game season, and you think that it should all come together. But the one thing that the emailer, and I don't remember what his name was, mentioned that I totally agree with, and he must have been listening to my Saturday morning show because it's one of the things I said. Last year, the Mets had a vibe to them. What was one of the things? It was Jose Iglesias. He had a special piece to him. He just brought that energy. No offense to Brett Baty, but he's very plain, very boring. Luis Angel Acuña brings a little bit of a spark, brings a little bit of an energy to him that I prefer seeing.
If Brett Baty hits the way he's hit in the minor leagues, and I understand that's a big if, or hits the way he's hit here in spring training, then the vibe will be fine. I mean, come on now. It's not about vibe, it's about performance. It is. Now, in terms of Lance's point about Jose Iglesias, look, we could sit here and fight about this all day, or we can go around in circles and circles on bringing Iglesias back versus not bringing Iglesias back. The reality is he's gone now. I mean, he's not sitting there in free agency anymore for the Mets to just pick him up. He's a San Diego Padre. They made a decision to move on from him. I understand the thinking behind it. Obviously, once McNeil goes down, it's easy to look at Iglesias and say, oh my God, how perfect would he have been as not a guy necessarily who had to be the second baseman, because I still would want to have given the opportunity to Brett Baty, but at least being that super utility role to start the year. But we went over this with the roster and the roster crunch. The problem is going back on it now is meaningless. He's gone. He's not on the team. And we'll see if they miss him. Look, one thing when you look at 2025, and one of the big questions that's going to need to be answered is, are they going to miss the leadership of Jose Iglesias and JD Martinez? Notice no one brings up JD Martinez because he didn't perform, because this is a performance business. If Brett Baty performs, you're going to like his vibe. If Jose Iglesias is hitting 215, but he came back, I don't care how much of a hit song he has, you're not going to like his vibe. It's all about performance. But we have seen that leadership that JD Martinez and Iglesias provided to the 24 team, and they're both gone. So it's certainly fair to say, hey, you can't, there's no war stat to kind of figure this out. There's no statistic that proves it, but how much in that room are they going to miss the leadership of both JD Martinez and Jose Iglesias? That is completely a fair question to ask.
I will say this much, and I know JD Martinez does not have a job right now, and I would gladly give him an invite, like right at left bench. Just let him sit there and let him talk to the young kids. Just, I swear to God, I know he doesn't want to do that, but like that's a perfect role for him.
Yeah, they literally don't have a roster spot for him. So he'd have to take the coach's role. He'd have to be Eric Chavez's water boy.
That's fine.
That's fine.
I let him do that.
Listen,
between him and Chavez, I think they'd be great. Chavez has been a fantastic hitting coach so far. Now listen, whether it's him or it's the fact that Lindor is really taking these kids under the wing, it feels like some of these kids are really producing.
Cliff writes, guys, I think you've got it right on the Baty, Acuña, Donovan Walton issue. But I don't think it's a 2 hot weeks by Brett Baty will be enough to redefine Jeff McNeil's role. Check out Baty's last 2 early season performances. In 2023, in his first 52 plate appearances, he hit .319 with a 147 WRC plus, which is 47% above league average. The rest of the season, in 337 plate appearances, he hit 196 with a weighted runs created plus of 55. That's below the league average. Last year, 2024, in his first 52 plate appearances, he hit 327 with a 122 weighted runs created plus. Rest of the season, 119 plate appearances, he hit 183 with a 66 weighted RC plus. A hot start hopefully reflects a breakout, or it could just be a third in 3 seasons. Fingers crossed for all these guys, but let's not presume that 2 hot weeks from Baty is more meaningful than it was for Acuña. Speaking of which, Luis Angel Acuña, in his first 27 plate appearances, was 10 for 26 with 2 doubles, a triple, 3 home runs. 5 of his 10 hits and 2 of his 3 home runs came in 2 games versus the Nationals, followed by 2 for 13, both singles, no walks. That's from Cliff in D.C. By the way, Cliff is the same emailer who supplied us with the Pete Alonso Scoopology lecture, in which we were breaking down all the scoops of Pete Alonso. I think this was prior to him re-signing. So Cliff points out the first Scoopology 101 lecture will be coming in April after we've got about 20 to 30 games in the books. That's where he's going to analyze every bounced throw to Pete Alonso. It's going to be on my mind too, Cliff. I think I'm going to create in my scorecard like a separate page in which I analyze the scoops of Alonso, and then we'll compare notes. We'll see what it's like. So with Baty getting off to a hot start, it's not 2 hot weeks isn't going to change what we think of him. It isn't going to put him in the Hall of Fame. All I'm saying is let's just walk down the road where Baty gets off to a very good start. Okay? Acuña's in the minor leagues. They either kept De Los Santos or Walton as the super utility infielder. And for the first 2 weeks of the year against lefties and righties, Brett Baty picks up right where he left off, and he's hitting .350. Okay? He's performing. And then Jeff McNeil is ready. All I'm suggesting is I would continue to try to ride the hot hand of Brett Baty and then see what happens. To your point, Cliff, he could then completely collapse like he has the last 2 years, and then Brett Baty's on the bench or back in the minor leagues like we talked about. So it's not redefining his role on some extreme level. It's basically, if he's hot and if he's performing, ride that for a little bit. Get creative on how you get his bat in the lineup. And I don't think it's going to take that much creativity because Brandon Nimmo's going to have DH days. And when he has DH days, Jeff McNeil could play left field. Brett Baty could play second base. There are days in which Brett Baty could just be your DH. Who knows what kind of start Jesse Winker and Starling Marte are going to get off to. So it's not, hey, Brett Baty had 2 good weeks. Screw Jeff McNeil. He's a utility player. It's more if Baty's hot. And by the way, I'd say the same thing with Acuña. If I'm wrong and Acuña is the everyday second baseman to start the year, which I highly doubt, but let's just say, and he got off to a great start, I wouldn't be in a rush to take at-bats away from him just because Jeff McNeil came back. That's my main point on Baty and how his hot start could change the role of Jeff McNeil. It just means continue to play him until proven otherwise. And hopefully it's not proven otherwise. Rick from Long Island writes, Evan, big fan of the Rico. And I had to write in after you said on the last episode that Brett Baty needs to be the everyday starter at second base until Jeff McNeil comes back. You could not be more wrong, and I'll tell you why. Before we get into why I'm wrong, as you're seeing, the early trend is a lot of people want to talk about Baty versus Acuña. That's probably the hottest story of spring training. I mean, we could say it's just getting to watch Juan Soto, but after a while, it's like, yeah, Juan Soto's a Met. That's great. I think the biggest kind of debate amongst Met fans is this Baty versus Acuña debate. So let's find out from Rick from Long Island why I am completely wrong that Brett Baty should be the everyday starter second baseman until Jeff McNeil comes back. Here we go. The Mets, as presently constituted, do not need a strong bat in the lineup at second base. They already have 5 All-Stars in the lineup, and they're primed to have one of the best offenses in the league regardless of who they put at second base. Having said that, all they need the second baseman to do is field their position effectively. And Brett Baty is not an adequate fielder at second base. First of all, he has 0 experience there. He's logged games at third base, left field, and DH in the big leagues, but never second. Although he's played a few innings there in spring training this past week, he misplayed 2 balls in a row and still has a ways to go in order to become a suitable option at the big league level. And the Mets, a team that has World Series aspirations, cannot afford to have a guy learn a new position at the major league level. Acuña, on the other hand, is an above-average defender at second base and shortstop, and anything he gives you with the bat is a bonus. And as we saw last season, he does have tremendous offensive potential. This should not be a debate in my view. Acuña should be given the second base role until McNeil gets back, and maybe after 2, depending on how he does. And Baty should make the roster as the 25th man, a utility hitter that can play all around the diamond and pinch hit off the bench. All right, so Rick is at least a proponent of both of them being on the team. Just Acuña needs to be the everyday second baseman, and his main reasoning is this offense is so good and so deep, all they need is a glove at second base. So I kindly disagree about that. With Alvarez out, let's start there. Now your catching position is a glove-first position. No matter who plays, whether it's Luis Torrens or the one day a week someone else is in the lineup, whether it's Hayden Singer or Jackson Reitz, or you take your pick. So you've already got one spot in your lineup that we didn't expect to be a glove-first, hey, whatever you get offensively, we'll take position. Number 2, center field, I got to tell you, is still that way. I know Jose Siri's had a decent camp, and he's got pop, and Tyrone Taylor finished the season strong last year. The track records of both Taylor and Siri tell you they are not plus offensive players, that you are using center field. And again, I'm okay with it because the lineup is good enough to have a plus defender where whatever you get offensively, that's a bonus. But that's 2 positions now. Now you're arguing second base without Jeff McNeil should be the same thing. I mean, how many freaking positions in this starting lineup are you okay saying, hey, it's defense, whatever we get offensively, we'll take? I disagree with that. Because the Alvarez injury certainly changed things in terms of what you expect from the catching position. And Center field, I don't think was ever going to be a plus offensive spot. So I guess where we disagree, Rick, is I'm not willing. And I this is kind of disrespectful to Acuña to even say this, but I'm not willing to basically punt the position just to have defense. I'm not. And I think Acuña is better than that. I think he has a chance to be better than that. But I need to see Brett Baty. I need to see what he's got. And I think right now in the short term, I think he's the better offensive option at second base than Luis Angel Acuña. In terms of what Baty is defensively, look, I'm not watching every single inning of spring training, but when I've seen Baty play second base, he's been okay. We're not going to really know until we watch him every single day at the major league level. And the truth is, I think they're going to take him out late for defense. Now, are they taking him out late for defense for Acuña because he's on the team? Or are they taking him out late for defense for De Los Santos or Walton? That's the other question David Stearns and Carlos Mendoza need to answer. But I disagree with the premise that I'm looking at second base specifically as a defensive position. They're going to need some offense in this lineup. And while they have a lot of it, 1 through 5, 1 through 6, you don't want the bottom of the order to be filled with easy outs. So I think we need to take into account that catcher, at least for the next few months till Alvarez comes back, is not a plus offensive position. Let's go to Jim P. and Beth Page. Jim writes, "Hello, guys. I love watching the Rico Brogna pod on YouTube." Well, there you go. Thank you. Thank you to those who watch it on YouTube or download it wherever you download your podcast. Thanks for consistently a great show and very creative off-season topics. We appreciate it. The other day, you discussed the question of who should play second base while McNeil is on the injured list. In looking at Acuña and Baty, your analysis of their offensive capabilities was enlightening, but you didn't talk about their defensive skills. This is the key in giving Acuña because he looks very comfortable at the position while Baty is really playing it for the first time on a consistent basis. With Alvarez out for a few months, the Mets have a chance to be one of the best up the middle teams in the league. I usually don't watch a lot of spring training games, so I'm relying on the Rico to tell me who the better defensive player at second base is and how much importance is going to be placed on that in deciding who wins the everyday job to start the season. So I am not denying that Luis Angel Acuña is a better defensive second baseman than Brett Baty. But I don't think that should be the end-all, be-all in discussing this. I think you need offense. I also think the evaluation part of Baty is very important because we just need to know what we have with the player. And I do think Acuña can benefit from performing high at the AAA level, something he didn't do last year. Let me get a few more of these Acuña Baty ones, and then we'll move on to something else.
Can I just ask real quick? Hold on,
yes.
Because that is a serious question. Last year, remember now, listen, these guys don't have options, but Joey Wendell made the team, and he was specifically there for defense. Zach Short came up for defense. Jose Iglesias was on the team for defense. Or you're telling me that you don't think that, even though I think that you're right, I think Brett Baty's going to get the call because of his bat right now, but you're telling me that David Stearns, who is so high on defense, won't really consider Acuña over Baty for that reason?
Well, I think that's the advantage he has, but it's not enough for him to win the job. I mean, what are you suggesting? Do you think Brett Baty should just go back to the minor leagues or just be a left-handed bat off the bench and Acuña should play every day to start the year?
I think that we last year talked about how Mark Vientos and, he could find plenty of roles last year, plenty of at-bats last year on the team, even with JD Martinez as a DH. There was enough places you could put him, whether it's a third base, a first base, or a DH, and then you can still play Baty and Alonso of JD Martinez.
Yeah.
That's Brett Baty. You can give Acuña a day off. You can give Vientos a day off. You can give the DH a day off, and you can still find 2 to 3 days a week to play Brett Baty.
I think eventually that is his role once Jeff McNeil's healthy. I think to start the year for the first 2 weeks or however much time Jeff has to miss due to this oblique issue, the way to get him consistent at-bats is by playing him at second base. I don't know if that's his long-term role. Obviously, if he hits the cover off the ball and then Jeff McNeil comes back and he struggles, sure, there could be a world where Brett Baty becomes the everyday second baseman. But I think the way you described it is how he eventually gets at-bats. But I think to start the season, he should play every day just to see what he's got. And I think in terms of the importance of defense, yeah, that's why the other guy to make the team is going to be a good defender, whether it's De Los Santos or Walton or Acuña himself. I mean, I'm not ruling out the possibility the Mets have him make the team. I don't know how strongly they feel about Acuña playing every day for those 2.5 weeks. Look, they could look at it and say, you know what? We'll have him make the team with Baty. He'll play against lefties, which we know they're going to see right away with Framber Valdez. And then when McNeil's back, depending on performance, but the likeliest scenario is we return Acuña to the major leagues, to the minor leagues. He plays every day, and we don't feel that stunts his growth. That is certainly an option on the table if the Mets are okay with him spending a couple of weeks not being an everyday player. But defense matters, but defense isn't the end-all, be-all. I mean, take a look at what's happened in spring training and tell me how long you guys would be okay with this. And it's spring training, so take it for what it's worth. Acuña hasn't hit. Brett Baty has. If we had 2.5 weeks of that, you know, quickly all your opinions would change. When Luis Angel Acuña's hitting 160 with a 550 OPS, oh, I love his defense, and I love his electricity. It doesn't matter if he doesn't perform. And I'm not telling you he's not going to perform, but there's more evidence that he won't, that those 2 weeks aren't exactly what he's just going to do. Now, I get it. Your argument's, well, there's no evidence Baty's going to perform either. Sure. That's why it's not the most ideal situation. It's not like Brett Baty's a lock. Brett Baty has conquered AAA. So sending him down to AAA feels to me like a waste of time. Like, other than continuing to learn second base, obviously that's the bonus. There's nothing to learn offensively. He's already hit at AAA. He's got to hit at the major league level. Now, one guy we have not mentioned in this discussion, I will allow Kevin, who sent this email, to ask the question, and then we'll break it down. What's up with Ronny Mauricio? That's Kevin. Well, here's what's up with Ronny Mauricio. And there are things I'm going to be very wrong about here on the Rico. I will raise my hand and take else. And then there are going to be things I'm very right about on the Rico. Now, when I'm right, and I remind you I'm right, I promise you, I'm not doing it in some kind of like, see, I'm such a genius. No, because trust me, I will remind you when I'm an idiot. In fact, before I brag about being right about anything, I picked the White Sox to get to the World Series 2 years ago on one of our prediction episodes of the Rico Brogna. So I'm a schmuck. There you go. Okay, good. We got that out of the way. I think since November, I have said to you, Hoff, we have got to get Ronny Mauricio's name out of our mind for a while. Not forever, not ruling him out, but for a while. Because the guy tore his ACL last December. He never got back last year, even to the minor leagues. He had a setback. We finally heard he had a setback. And then even throughout the early part of spring training, and even before spring training began, when Alonso wasn't back in the fold, I kept saying to you guys, I wouldn't think about Mauricio at first. Like, the guy's going to have to go to AAA and hit. I just can't see any way Ronny Mauricio is a part of this discussion coming out of spring training, right? Then spring training starts, and Mendy admits we're not going to see him in a game until the middle of March. And so I said, see what I told you? He ain't even playing until the middle of March. No way you could think about this guy in any kind of role to start the season. Now, here, we're in the middle of March. Hello, beware the Ides of March. Mendy reveals there's no setback, but he's not getting into a spring training game. Gee whiz, I'm shocked. Like, Ronny Mauricio has to go to AAA. And I hope he goes there, and I hope he picks up exactly where he left off when he got us all hot and bothered at the end of 2023. But right now, when we're talking about second base, Acuña versus Baty, yeah, there's no Ronny Mauricio. And I think Mendy's announcement, there's no setback, okay, but he's not getting into a game, is a reminder that we almost have to sit back, let Ronny go to AAA. Hopefully he puts up massive numbers, and hopefully we're having a discussion about calling him up, not because they need him, but because, hey, he's tearing it up so well in AAA. But this is not a surprise. If you expected Mauricio to be a part of second base or DH or third base because Alonso was gone, I think you were being naive. Maybe we see him at some point this season, but I think this is all but confirmed. Ronny Mauricio's recovery off a torn ACL has not been a great recovery. Doesn't mean he's failed forever, but this has been iffy, to say the least.
No, and I know that you like to go to the basketball analogies, but I'm going to go to a football one. Reminds me very much of Jordan Travis. We can't wait to see this guy. Now, Jordan Travis is different because we saw him in college. We saw a little glimpse of Ronny Mauricio in the majors, but I just feel that Ronny Mauricio is going to be the best prospect coming out of the Mets organization. I don't know why, but something about him kind of reminds me a little bit of a Yordan Alvarez. Something about him is exciting, and it makes us impatient. So, yeah, I think the fan base is trying to rush him back more than the team is. I think the team just wants to slow play it because right now they don't need him. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's the truth. You could always use an amazing player, but you don't need him right now.
Well, they don't need him. If Ronny Mauricio is healthy, guess what? We wouldn't be fighting about Acuña versus Baty because we'd both be saying Ronny Mauricio. So
yeah,
need may not be the right word. Do they need him? I don't know if they need him, but he would change the dynamic at second base. He just would. And this sucks, man, because he's a young guy who in the end period of a horrible 2023 season, a season that was just all bad, he was the positive. He was the shining light. He was the hope moving forward. He comes up and he hit a little bit. I know he didn't put up massive numbers. He didn't tear it up, but he gave us enough to wet our whistle. And that coming off of the heels of a great year at AAA and coming off the heels of being impressive in spring training, where we all saw him and were like, whoa, Ronny Mauricio looks like the real deal. And for him to get hurt, and he was tearing up the Dominican, by the way. You ever see his numbers in the Dominican before he got hurt? He was hitting 450.
He was ridiculous. Didn't he win the MVP? No, that was the year before he won the MVP for the Dominican League, right?
I'm not sure if he won the MVP. All I could tell you is that he was hitting before he had that mishap between the base paths. So it's a really unfortunate circumstance for him, but I think we got to take a deep breath. I'd be curious to see what position they play him at AAA. Does he play second? Does he play third base? Does he play, I'm going to guess right now. I bet you he just DHs. I think they're going to take it, if they're going to take it slow with him. And remember, he's a natural shortstop too. And they did try him out a little bit in the outfield in 2023. They were moving him all over the place in 2023. Came up as a shortstop, a little bit of second, very little bit amount of third, and a little bit of outfield. My guess is he's just going to DH. And I think that's where, if he hits down there, where we'll see him. I think we're going to see him as a designated hitter. Think about it, that role is held down right now by Jesse Winker and Starling Marte. It's not exactly the firmest thing in the world. But yeah, it sucks. It sucks what happened to him. I wish he was a part of the team right now and making an impact right now, but we have to wait.
Yeah, no, and you're right about the Winker Marte thing. But again, I do feel like Winker Marte, I'm going to say this over and over and over. The end of the day, Winker Marte, the combo of those two, it's going to be the best DH the Mets have ever had.
Well, we've only had the DH for a couple of years, so.
And let's go through that list. Daniel Vogelback, Darren Ruff.
Think about it. I know we had it in 2020, but I make believe that didn't happen. So 22, 23, 24, what do we have? J.D. Davis, Dom Smith, Daniel Vogelback, Darren Ruff, Daniel Vogelback, J.D. Martinez. Yeah. By the way, it better be the best DHs the Mets have ever had. Vinny C. writes, when you said on the Rico that the Pursuit documentary that just came out about Juan Soto was basically a recap of 2024, otherwise, who cares? What will they say? We paid him $800 million. Anyway, I heard you say that, and I wanted to enjoy a 2024 recap. And my reaction? Classless move leaving out Jose Iglesias, which obviously was only done because he's not back for them in 2025. The guy who was the turning point of the year, the guy who became the mascot of the team with OMG, the guy who Nick Castellanos called the MVP of the league, got exactly 4 seconds in the 2024 highlight video. Really? Same thing to a lesser extent with J.D. Martinez. Come on, Mets, be classy. That's from Vinny C. So there are 2 documentaries already about last year's Mets, which is crazy because it was last year and they didn't exactly win a World Series, as exciting as the season was. The Pursuit is what Vinny is talking about. That's the 2-part Mets documentary about the pursuit of Juan Soto. And I watched the first part, and it was entertaining, but I didn't learn anything. And it felt like it was mostly a recap of 2024. I didn't walk away, Vinny, feeling the same way about the disrespect to Iglesias. I mean, they showed his concert rather briefly, but I thought it was almost a rushed recap of 2024. The more in-depth recap of 2024 is Mets Yearbook, which is a show SNY has for many of the years of the last 20 years. Like, they'll have a Mets Yearbook on crappy years. They'll have Mets Yearbook 2013. So they did a Mets Yearbook for this past year. I was lucky enough to be a part of it, and I watched it when it first came out, and it was very well done. It was a really in-depth documentary of this past year, and Jose Iglesias was all over it. He was everywhere. The concert, the song, the energy. So I don't know if this was the Mets being not classy or if it was just that it was a rushed recap of 2024, because everything about it was rushed. Like, even when they jump into the playoffs, it's like, boom, here's Pete Alonso, skipping a lot of things that happen. The second part, I assume, which comes out in about 5 days, will be more about, the actual pursuit of Juan Soto as opposed to a quick recap of 2024. But Vinny, I respect your opinion. I did not get that vibe that it was a kind of a screw you to Jose Iglesias and JD Martinez because they're not on the team. It's funny. I feel like a douche because when I was in that doc Mets Yearbook, one of the lines I had, and they used it at the very end, was me saying, and I certainly felt this way after they signed Soto, that, boy, Juan Soto fits. He really fits the OMG Mets. And now there is no OMG Mets. That's last year's team. It's not staying in 2025. So he may have fit the OMG Mets, but he wasn't on the OMG Mets. He won't be on the OMG Mets. Whatever this Met team is, I don't know what their nickname will be. Hopefully it's not going to be a negative nickname. Hopefully it'll be something that lives in history. Mark Gray writes, guys, before this new season even starts, I am proud and confident, and I have never felt this way as a Met fan, and I'm 51 years old. Here's why. Our team has at least become a favored destination amongst free agents. Our trainers and coaches are excellent. Our pitching lab is the talk of baseball. Our management is superb. We have the most passionate and richest single owner in the sport. We have the depth to weather multiple injuries, and our prospects know they need to be outstanding to make it. We caught the biggest free agent fish in decades and pried him away from the douches across town. Then we acquired Clay Holmes and turned him into our opening day starter, like how we acquired Luis Torrens and turned him into the best backup catcher in baseball. We also saved Luis Severino's career and even got Harrison Bader to look like an everyday player for half a season. And oh yeah, remember how we acquired Mendy and turned him into the best new manager in the sport? Are you seeing a pattern here? Remember when the Yankees would snag all of our beloved players and they'd have wonderful years upon setting foot in the Bronx? It's been a long time coming, but the little brother is all grown up, and now we can kick the big brother's ass. The revolution will be televised. Well, Mark, when you put it that way, yes, they've done a great job over the last year of taking, and I wouldn't include Harrison Bader in this because I think Harrison Bader was Harrison Bader. He was exactly what he had been as a major leaguer, which I said over a year ago on the Rico, which Hoff was offended by. He's a good fourth outfielder. So I would exclude Bader from this. The Mets have done a superb job of taking Yankee cast-offs into something special. Luis Torrens is a fine backup. Hopefully he will not be exposed as a starter for 2 months. I would not be taking any bows yet on Clay Holmes. He hasn't thrown a game yet or an inning yet in real games that count. Is he off to a great start? Yeah. Am I excited about Clay Holmes? Yes. Did I make a bet in the state of New Jersey on FanDuel that he's going to win the National League Cy Young? Yes. But no bows yet on Clay. You can take some bows on Mendy. He had a wonderful first year, and the Mets did an incredible job with Luis Severino. I understand Mark and other Met fans who take pride out of that with the Yankees, but like Lindor said, when Sal Licata tried to bait him with you, Pete, last week, when Sal said, I forget how he phrased it. I don't want to misquote him. Like, are we the best team in New York, or are we the? How do you phrase that to Francisco?
He said, don't you want to be, how's it feel to be the best team in New York?
Okay. And Francisco had the same answer I honestly have, which is I want to be the best team in baseball. Like being the best team in New York, sure, it lets you rub it into your buddies and you could be a jerk on sports talk radio. But the reality is, I want to beat the Dodgers. I want to beat the Braves before I even get to the Dodgers. I want to beat the Braves. I want to beat the Phillies. So I get it, Mark, and I appreciate Mark voicing the confidence that the Met fan has, something we're not used to, because we're not a confident bunch. I even have some of those things Mark was talking about. You may have noticed it a little bit on the Rico in spring training. Like when Manaea got hurt, I didn't panic. And I think if this was 2 years ago, I would have. I would have been, it's Panic City. We suck. We'll see him in July. But, and I don't know if it's a trust in the trainers, a trust in Mendy, a trust in Stearns, a trust in just everything, the apparatus of the New York Mets. But my attitude was, you know what? Let's take a deep breath. If all goes well, he'll be back in the middle of April. And I trust them. And so far, so good. Obviously, he still has to come back, but so far, so good. Let me get to a few more of your emails. The ricob@gmail.com. This is from Adam. Adam writes, Evan and Hoff, pod is great as always. And I know it was hard work going down to spring training, dealing with the sun and warm weather to bring us content. So thank you for your sacrifices. It was a lot of hard work.
I got to be honest, it was very hot down there. Leaving from here where it was like 40 degrees and then it was like 91 in your freaking Corvette, I mean, your Mustang or whatever, it was tough.
It was tough. It was very tough, hard work. Evan, I want your opinion if you agree to the following statement. You could argue that besides Lindor, Soto, and maybe Pete, Jeff McNeil would be the next in line as the position player that the Mets couldn't afford an injury to. Let me explain. Jeff McNeil, a player who can play multiple outfield positions and infield spots, who is a shoo-in for your opening day lineup, and he gets hurt. It's essentially like multiple MLB players on the roster, especially defensively, getting hurt. To part of the Met fan base, especially on Twitter, who's treating this injury as a positive, they're not thinking clearly. To those Mets fans, shame on you. Just because you mentally moved on from Jeff or he's fallen out of your favorites, to think we're better off, you clearly aren't thinking. I mean, how can it not be a big deal? Now your 26th man is more likely to be Donovan Walton, north a statistical better pitcher than batter, who as well is an unproven but unnecessary left-handed hitting second baseman in Baty. I think it's just impossible to take this lightly. Flexibility, especially late in the game, is important when you're trying to put your best foot forward defensively. In closing, with Alvarez hurt and now McNeil, your middle infield has taken a hit in spring training. So what's the moral of the story? No more injuries for the next 2 weeks. Thank you, Adam. I think that anybody that looks at McNeil's injury, forget about the human aspect of it because he'll be fine. All right. Jeff McNeil will be totally fine either way. But from a baseball aspect, no, it's not good. Does it create an easy opportunity for a Baty or Acuña? Absolutely. But you're right. It hurts your depth. It hurts your flexibility. There are questions around the health of Brandon Nimmo. Now, he's back in the lineup playing. He's been mostly playing DH. But like we've talked about, he's not going to play every single day. Starling Marte is currently DHing, hasn't played the outfield. He's not going to play every single day and may not be available every time we expect him to face a lefty at DH. Right now, Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor are fine and healthy, but you lose another guy, or even with what they already have, McNeil's value in being able to shift to left field is absolutely a weapon to have. I think that Met fans are down on McNeil for two reasons. Number one, he hasn't performed. That's the easy part. He hasn't been the same guy he was 2 years ago. And I think there's this belief that McNeil doesn't bring the good vibes, because he complains when he's out. He screams and yells. I think that even though he acts like Paul O'Neill, he doesn't get the same treatment that Yankee fans had for Paul O'Neill when they looked at him as a warrior. When Paul O'Neill would slam his helmet down, he cares. When Jeff McNeil slams his helmet down, he's a big crying bitch. It's funny how that works. So I agree with you, Adam. Met fans have mostly turned on Jeff McNeil. You are right about that. But they are not a better team with him not being there, because you do lose that depth and you do lose that flexibility. Charlie writes, Evan and Hoff love the pod. Sean Manaea missing the first few weeks, not the end of the world, but it's important to start thinking about adding pitching help. I think that we have good depth right now, but how many more injuries before we should add another starter? And I think a legit Mets trade target should be Sandy Alcantara. Coming off the injury, he should be at a slightly lower price and is cheaper and is signed long compared to a guy like Dylan Cease. Sandy looked good against the Mets in spring training, and he hasn't been a name I've heard talked a lot about. I think he's an incredible pitcher. How in a six-man rotation, he could throw 6 or more innings almost every outing. Remember last year when Sevy threw that complete game, ironically, the only game I went to last year, and it was huge, a huge deal. Sandy did that routinely. If the Mets find themselves in a place where they need to add, I think Sandy is the answer because the contract is more reasonable and the prospects they gave up to get a deal done. That's from Charlie. I think that Sandy Alcantara, if made available, and right now he is not available, and I have said this before, I would be stunned if the Marlins traded him prior to him re-enhancing his value by going out there, pitching every 5 days, and proving he's healthy. Like, he needs to do that. So I do not believe that they would trade him until he's healthy, until he proves he's the Cy Young guy he was a couple of years ago. But you mentioned the contract. Sandy is due to make this season at age 29, $17.3 million. He is due to make next year at age 30, $17.3 million. And then there's a club option at $21 million. So he is signed essentially to a 3-year contract in which he is making about $60 million. That is a steal. And because of that steal, and because he's got 2 years of team control after this year, I believe that the New York Mets will go balls to the wall to trade for Sandy Alcantara. I believe that they will give up the necessary ask that the Marlins will ask for. And I would predict to you that I think that they're the leaders in the clubhouse. Now, that may sound crazy, but I think because every other team that may be bidding on Sandy, and a lot of teams would. I mean, the Mets aren't going to be the only one. The Yankees certainly better be a team that's going to, with the news around Garrett Cole being lost for this year and parts of next year. And it's such a reasonable contract. It's a very reasonable deal, and it's at age 29, 30, and 31. So there'll be a lot of teams going after him, but I think a lot of those other teams would also go after Dylan Cease, would also go after a starting pitching rental. And because David Stearns has shown that, hey, we really don't want to give a long-term deal to a guy in his 30s, you have a chance to acquire a guy who's barely going into his 30s, and you have him on a 3-year deal. And who knows? You could possibly even try to work out an extension with Sandy sooner rather than later, because if you're Sandy Alcantara, and you may be asking, come on, why would he ever work out an extension? Because he's going to go into free agency at the age of 32. Not exactly ideal. Where as of now, you could say, you know what, we'll take care of age 32, 33, 34, and we'll give you a big raise. And I do think David Stearns would be more willing to do that, because I think where he's going to stay away from long-term deals into his 30s is like 6-year deals or 7-year deals. So I think there are great possibilities with Sandy Alcantara, which is why I think the Mets are going to go balls to the wall to get him. The Marlins have clearly shown in the past they don't care about division, so I don't think the division is an issue. The Mets have made trades with them. The Phillies made, obviously, the big trade for JT Realmuto with them a few years back, so I don't think division will be a problem. And I think that's the target. I think that is the more realistic target for the Mets in adding a pitcher than Dylan Cease is.
But question, isn't this a different management or different ownership than when like Realmuto got traded to the Phillies? I'm trying to think of any
that
other
is true. No, you're right.
You know,
Everybody's different. You're right. So they could have that belief. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I'll give you a reason. They traded Jesus Luzardo to the Phillies.
Oh,
that was this past offseason. It's almost like they want to trade their players inside the division.
It feels like every team has made a big trade with the Marlins except for the Mets. I mean, unless you want to count that Piazza trade from well back in the day.
Well, we made a lot of big trades with the Marlins. It was just a long time ago. You got the Piazza trade. You got the Al Leiter trade. You got the Dennis Cook trade, which were actually separate, believe it or not. They almost felt like one. So the Mets have made their trades with the Marlins. It's just been It's been a few minutes. I think they're going to go. I think that's their target. I think that fits everything that David Stearns would want to do. And I think that when you have a collection of some pretty good prospects, now I don't know which ones you'll be more willing to trade than others, obviously. Everyone's not equal. McLean and Tong and Sproat, they're not all viewed exactly the same way. And obviously you got to kind of reach into what Miami is interested in. But I do think that Sandy is going to be a guy the Mets really, really target. But on the Marlins side, because you do have to think about them for a second, I just don't see them trading him until he really re-enhances his value. And I think the peak for Miami would be him having a big first half and trading him at the deadline. Because what you can sell, not just the Mets, but every other team in baseball, including small market teams. Take the Pirates as an example. Let's say the Pirates get off, or the Reds get off to a good start. They may never pay Sandy the big time money, but you would be able to acquire him for this season post-deadline and then have them under team control for 2 more years, which is great. Or you could even say, I'll take him for this deadline next year, and then I'll trade him a year before free agency. So I think if you're the Marlins, you're smart to deal him at this trade deadline just because you could get everybody involved. It wouldn't be a small pool of teams that would be involved. You can get a lot of teams involved. So, but look, Sandy's got to pitch well. That's the other thing. Like, he's got to go out and remind everybody of his former Cy Young self. He does that. I think the Marlins will be able to go bank. And then I'll tell you right now, I guess I've been a prospect hugger over the last few months here on the Rico, or at least the last few years on the Rico. I think there are certain players where you say, no, I go for it. My fear with Dylan Cease is that he's a free agent at the end of the year, and I think he's going to get a 6-7 year deal. And he's not getting it from Stearns. So I don't have the stomach to take Jet Williams and send him on his way for a year of Dylan Cease. Do I have the stomach to do that when I'm getting 2.5 years plus more of Sandy Alcantara? Yes, I do. It's a very different discussion. So maybe it's my heart speaking, but I'm also trying to use my brain here. I think that is going to be a name we talk a lot about on the Rico Brogna. I do. I think we'll talk about that name quite a bit. Now, the Mets could solve this by just pitching great. Let Griffin Canning be a Cy Young finalist, and we won't talk about Sandy Alcantara. But we do appreciate the emails. You can keep them coming, and we'll try to mix in some mailbags throughout this season. TheRicoB@gmail.com. TheRicoB@gmail.com. Coming up, the week leading up to opening day, which is like a week from now, we're going to do a lot of prediction Ricos. We'll do an all-encompassing MLB prediction Rico. We'll do Mets-specific predictions. We'll obviously finalize the roster and analyze that once it's set. So we got a lot to talk about as we get you ready for opening day 2025. Download the Rico Brogna. Make sure you're subscribing so you never miss one. We try to publish a Rico Brogna on Wednesdays and Sundays, but as you may notice, we pop them in a lot more than that. So subscribe, and then you'll never have to worry about missing a new edition of Rico Brogna. We appreciate you listening, downloading, and subscribing. I'll be on the radio on WFAN at 2 o'clock. I'll see you there. Thanks for listening to Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.